Through the different brewing methods, cuppings, shops, and interviews I've experienced over the past few months, I've come to believe that coffee is subjective. Everyone can have a unique way to experience it that's perfect for them. Because with so many options, there's no black and white answer, and we have to find a gray area. I'm Elle Grayson, and this is the Coffee Shop Project. How did you just in general end up in the coffee industry? Were you raised on it, or was it something that you decided later in life that you wanted to tap into?
I was not raised in the coffee industry, but I would always sneak my dad's Dunkin' Donuts coffee. Like, I feel like every weekend he had a cup of Dunkin' Donuts, and they put something addictive in that creamer. I swear, because I remember being 6 years old and trying to take his coffee. Technically, I guess my coffee career started in high school. My first real job as a teenager was at a little local independent shop in Atlanta. It was like the only place in town that wasn't like a Starbucks. It was like the cool place, to go get coffee when you're 17. And of course, like all I drank then was like fraps and chais. Not there's anything wrong with that. They're delicious. But I really got into coffee as a career after college. I started working for an independent roaster in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it was a really small roaster. I think I was like the third full-time employee, but it was a really wonderful experience. My boss was awesome. She cared so much about buying high-quality coffee, and she had an amazing old roaster that was like a really rare, unique roaster to have. And so my introduction to coffee as a career was probably a little different. I feel like most people probably start out, working at Starbucks, and they kind of like dip their toe into this like specialty coffee world. But I was luckily just kind of entered, like that was my first job. It was at a really good specialty coffee roaster. And so my boss at the time, this was in 2008, my boss at the time was pursuing her Q certification. Okay. So even though I didn't have like hopes and dreams of becoming Q certified necessarily after seeing her go through it, but I was introduced to that at a fairly young age and at a really early point in my career. And so I was kind of just like aware of probably more of the supply chain, what went into it, and how to make it better from like a really, really early point in my career.
So would you say that like people can be trained to have a Q palate, or are you kind of like born with a better inclination to be able to succeed as a Q grader?
No, anyone could do it if they tried. There's some percentage of people in the world, so like 20% of people worldwide are like non-tasters, or they just have they are genetically less inclined. So other than those, if you are like actually a non-taster, you might not be able to do it. But other than that, if you probably should like coffee. I feel like that's probably a prerequisite. But if you like coffee and you train, there's like no reason anyone couldn't do it. It's like a muscle to be exercised. So if you practice, you can do it.
When you are, as a Q grader, conducting a cupping, what are you specifically evaluating for? Like, I read in my little book, like, there's like the 4 principles of coffee tasting. Is it something like that, but way more advanced?
It depends. What did your book say are the 4 principles of coffee tasting?
I read in the book that the 4 principles of coffee tasting was you smell the coffee and you smell for sweetness, and then you take a sip and you swish it around in your mouth, and you evaluate if the body is milky or watery. Then you take another sip and you see where the acidity hits on your palate. And then after that, you take one more sip and see if the sweetness is a fruity sweetness or more of like a chocolatey, nutty sweetness.
Yeah, that's a really good intro. So it is just like that, but on steroids.
Okay.
And so what we do is we take freshly ground coffee. So you do a specific ratio. I think it's like 8.25 ounces per 10-ounce cup. I forget now because you're always changing the ratio based on your cup size. So you take freshly ground coffee and you smell that coffee dry. So before you put water on it, you smell that and you're assessing, what fragrances you get and like the intensity level of that. You're also just like looking for off fragrances that would signify to you that something went wrong here. So you smell it twice, once when it's dry, once when it's wet, and you're kind of, looking for Did I get the same fragrances both when it's dry and it's wet? Was it the same level of intensity? Did anything change once I added the water? Once you are tasting the coffee, once it's brewed and you're actually tasting the coffee, you're assessing the acidity, the flavor, the balance of the coffee, the aftertaste, the cleanliness. Yeah, is it a generally sweet cup of coffee, or is there something else going on here? What is the acidity? Do I feel it on the tip of my tongue, or do I feel it like in my jaw? Is it pleasant? Does it have a really high acidity, and is that good, or does it have a really high acidity and that's actually bad and kind of throws the cup off? So you're looking for all of these attributes, and depending on what temperature the coffee is, you can kind of like assess those. You're kind of assessing along the way, but you might be able to assess, the flavor once the coffee's a little bit cooler, and you might assess the acidity all the way through. Like, oh wow, it has a really nice acidity once, when it's piping hot, but like once it cools, is that acidity still pleasant in the coffee? So you're kind of judging all of these things, and you're not really putting your own take on it. You're not going, oh, I like that or I don't like that. I'm just kind of saying, okay, how does this measure on the scale? And then do those things contribute to like a really balanced cup?
Okay, so you're kind of like evaluating how the coffee will be experienced by the consumer from the first pour when it's like in the beginning and fresh all the way through till it's like kind of cold and you're drinking it 3 hours late.
Yes, and there's like in coffee you kind of have a saying like bad coffee tells on itself. So if you brew 2 cups of coffee and one of them's high quality and one of them's not high quality, and you let them sit and cool down, that bad cup of coffee is going to taste absolutely terrible when it's cool. But that good cup of coffee, it might not taste the same way that it would when it's hot, but it's still going to be, sweet and drinkable, and it's still going to taste good.
Okay. How do you brew coffee when you're evaluating for a Q grading level cupping?
So you set up, we typically do 3 to 5 cups of one coffee, and it's almost like a little French press method. So you put the grounds in the bottom of a little cup, you pour water on top, and those grounds, some fall to the bottom, but some form a crust on top. Okay. And so it's kind of like if you ever brew a French press, and before you push the press down, you see that crust or like that layer of coffee. Yeah. That's the same thing that's happening. It's just in a little bowl. And you brew it for, 3 to 4 minutes, depending on what size cup you have. And then you break that crust with a spoon, like a specific type of spoon. So you break that crust, and that kind of like releases all these aromas from the cup. And so you're like assessing the aroma on that break. So you push like the grounds back, and it just like releases this amazing coffee smell.
That's so cool.
And then you just kind of skim the grounds off of that cup, and you discard them. And then you just have you have all these little cups of coffee, and you go through with your little spoon and you slurp each one. And rinse your spoon in between, so you don't accidentally take something that may be in one cup but not in another, so you don't kind of contaminate your other cups. But there's definitely a technique to tasting coffee, and it really does help, and it really does matter, but you have to like aerate it through your teeth. So it's really rude because you're slurping.
Is it the slurping? Like everything... I wanted to ask you that. Yeah. Why do people do that?
It's everything like you're taught not to do when you're growing up, but you essentially just have to and it goes like through your front teeth, and what it does is it aerates the coffee. So it takes it from a liquid and kind of turns it into a gas inside of your mouth. And that helps you taste and perceive more, because, our taste buds are only we're really only perceiving salt, sweet, bitter, sour, and umami flavors on our tongue. But if I say this coffee tastes like chocolate, it's because that's happening. Like I'm perceiving that actually with my nose and my olfactory glands. So it's like a retronasal thing. So that's why it's important to slurp it, aerate the coffee, and that kind of like sprays it all over your palate, and your mouth, and your nose.
That's so interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And so that's kind of how you like open yourself up to like tasting all these amazing flavors. You can also, I always like took the exercise of if you hold your nose while you taste coffee, it tastes completely different because you're locking that sense of smell off while you taste coffee. So it'll be very one-dimensional when you taste. Fun, quick little science experiment.
Yeah.
2-second science.
Honestly, after all of the experiences you've gone through your training formally and through experience in the industry, what is your favorite, like, ideal coffee profile, and how would you brew that?
Ooh, that's a good question. It depends on my mood, is the answer. I love, like, a really great, like, balanced, like, Colombian coffee. I do love coffees from Ethiopia, but like on a day-to-day basis, I honestly, one of my favorite roasters is a roaster in California. It's a buddy of mine, so that's probably why. But it's called Yes Please, and he just makes fresh, like small batch seasonal blends. And so I think we talk a lot about like single origin in the specialty industry, and it is really important. And there are amazing single origin coffees, but I also think it's just really cool to like taste a coffee and say, hey, I really like what's going on there, and taste another coffee and go, ooh, I think that would actually taste really good together. And then make this like absolutely amazing blend that's just kind of like perfectly balanced of like sweetness and acidity and body. So for me, I'm kind of in a phase where I'm drinking a lot of like really good blends. And I love what he does with that. When I'm not drinking blends, I love a good Guatemalan coffee. Something from Huehuetenango is always really nice. I think I tend to like sweeter, more well-balanced, well-rounded coffees. So I like brewing. I brew daily in a Kalita wave. So yeah, if you're familiar, it's kind of got like a cone shape, but it has a flat bottom. And it just makes for a really, really balanced cup. You can brew any coffee on a Kalita and it's going to taste good.
So is that why, because I think I also tend to prefer a more, if I understand correctly, a more balanced cup. Is that why I prefer it in like a Clever Dripper to a Chemex?
Yeah. There's going to be slight changes to the brew. I mean, method to method, and then obviously brew to brew. If you pour the water faster or hotter, even if you're making two Clevers side by side, they could taste pretty different based on your water temp and either how agitated the coffees were. But yeah, I do think certain coffees taste better in different brew methods for sure.
And then the last question, just that I had to kind of bring everything together. If someone watching this wanted to start leaning towards coffee tasting or even becoming a Q grader, where would they start? What resources would you recommend them taking a look
at? Great question. You can always find resources at CQI's website. I think it's coffeequalityinstitute.org. Fact check me on that. The Specialty Coffee Association also has classes you can pay for. They probably have links to other resources as well. So if you want to read and learn about it in that sense, SCA is probably a great place to start. Also, your local coffee shop, like talk to them about it, talk to your barista, talk to their owners, see if they have classes, or, a lot of places will have weekly or monthly cuppings where you invite the public to come do that. Obviously now that's not happening. That would be a super spreader event, and that's a really terrible thing to do. So out of love, I think people are not doing that now. But I would start with your local shop. If you have a shop that you love to go to and think they have high quality coffee and you want to learn more about coffee, people that work in coffee shops want to talk about coffee and tell you about coffee. So they would love to answer questions. Awesome. So I would start there. Thank you for having me. That was fun.
Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.